In a previous video, I showed the current design of Plant Places Mobile. This is the GPS of Plant screen, and we're going to start to emulate this screen using the constraint layout. So we're going to need latitude, longitude, GPS age as labels. We'll need their values. Little pause button here. Then an autocomplete text for plant name, an autocomplete text for location, normal edit text for description, and then 3 buttons below, and then optionally we can put a little image view down below. Now we might not get to putting the images on the buttons just yet. That's okay, we can do that in a separate video. Our concern right now is simply to emulate a screen that looks like this in Android Studio. This is Android Studio version 3.01. Using Android application, I have targeted at 26. I might even bump that up to 27. So let's go ahead and go into Plant Places Mobile. First thing that we need to do is we need to find the file that we want to edit. And so we have 2 options. One is Activity GPS of Plant, and the other is Content GPS of Plant. If you don't know the difference, it looks really weird because over here in the editor window, which I realize is tiny now, but we'll make that a little bit bigger in a moment, they both essentially look the same. Now, the reason is the Content GPS of Plant is the one that we want to start with. Activity GPS of Plant, think of it as a layer on top of Content GPS of Plant. So anything that's in this Activity GPS of Plant is in a different layout, different flow, and that's the whole point. We want to be able to kind of put a transparency on top of our layout and put other components on that transparency. So, moral of the story, Content GPS of Plant is the one that we want. Now you see we have a little WYSIWYG editor, or what you see is what you get, but it's really hard to work with right now because everything is so tiny. So what I'm going to do is hit this little bar here to collapse that, and you see we get a little more real estate. Now I can bump this up a little more if I want, and we see here's our hello world. Now take a look at these boxes. This is just the default layout that we get when we design a new layout. It comes with this hello world. You see how the hello world is kind of centered, and anytime I hover over one of these boxes, it gives me an option to basically remove the box. So these are the constraints where this hello world widget is currently anchored. It was anchored to the top, the bottom, and both sides, and you see I can hit this box, and when it turns red, I can take away all of these different anchors and just kind of leave it at a default flow. Okay. That hello world is just for test. I'm going to highlight and delete it. And now what I'm going to do is I'm going to focus on the top left where we have latitude, longitude, and then a GPS age. So we're going to have some labels, and in the land of Android Studio, that's called a text view. So if it's a label that's not going to change, I can just plop it right on here, leave it at the default ID of text view, which is kind of ugly. If it is a label where the text might change programmatically, I want to change that ID immediately so I don't forget what the purpose of this item is. So for the text, we're going to call this one latitude. Now you see I can type it in like so. A little better idea, I can hit the ellipsis here. This will take just a few seconds to rise up, but I can hit the ellipsis here and I can essentially tell it, hey, why don't we make this a new string value? We'll call it latitude, and value latitude. We'll make it lowercase latitude. What's the difference? If I make it a new string value, it doesn't hard code that name latitude here in the layout. Instead, it makes a new entry in a file called strings.xml. Okay, so you see here's that latitude that we just made. You see it has string name equaled latitude with a lowercase l, and then it has the value of latitude. Now, what's the value of putting this into strings.xml? If you take a look, strings.xml is in a folder called values. If you want to support multiple languages, what you can do is you can make a folder called values_fr for French, values_es for Spanish, so on and so forth, and then to simply duplicate this file, and then in one nice concise file, you can do all the translations. If we had it hard-coded in the layout, we'd have to go into each individual layout, and actually I don't know if that'd even be doable, at least not easily doable. So for internationalization support, always a good idea to put these guys, any text that the user will see, into our strings.xml. Okay, now, notice as I mouse over, all of these are empty circles, but when I mouse over they turn green. And that's essentially telling me I can bind this, I can create a constraint. For example, I can say tack this guy to the very top bar and also make it go left. So we put the latitude label essentially in the top left of the screen. Okay, let's do another one for longitude. Now, longitude, of course, will go into text. We'll do it like we did it before. Add a new string resource, longitude and longitude. Get in the habit of doing this. Get in the habit of putting everything in strings.xml. It's going to make your life a lot easier. Now, longitude, I don't want it to be anchored to the top. Instead, I want it to be anchored under latitude. So you see, I can draw the anchor like this, and now longitude as a label is sitting under latitude. But it's kind of sitting in no man's land. It's sitting in a funny place. So let me grab and anchor this guy left as well. And now you see we have latitude, longitude, and then we can do one more. We can do our GPS age. Oops, grabbed the wrong one. So we'll delete that guy. And this guy, of course, will go in and we'll say GPS age. Okay, new resource, new string value, GPS age, and GPS age. Okay, and we choose OK. We don't tend to use colons in Android after a label. We tend to just kind of have it without a colon. Just one less thing, one less character. We want to go as simple as possible. Note where I'm linking GPS age. Okay, wonderful. Now, these are the labels that are pretty much static, but the latitude and the longitude value and the GPS age, those are going to change over time. So I'm going to grab a new text view, and now this one's a little bit tricky because we'll just kind of put them out, whoops, we'll just kind of toss them out here in no man's land. And this one, first, the very first thing I want to do is change the ID to txt latitude, because I'm going to change the value of this programmatically. I want to remember what the ID is of this label when I'm back in the activity, and I want to program against it. Next, the text, instead of text view, I'm going to add a new resource, and we're going to call this 0.0, and we'll just make it 0.0. So this 0.0 essentially means that latitude has not been found yet. We just have the default. Okay, now, constraints. First of all, we can anchor this to the top, but now we have to think about how to anchor it to the left. We don't want to anchor it all the way to the left of our screen, but we also kind of want to have these values flush. And if you notice, latitude, longitude, and GPS age are all different lengths. What I'm tempted to do is anchor this to the top and then also anchor it left to the word that is the longest. That way, if I anchor all of these, I'm going to have 3 total. If I anchor all of these things over here to the left of longitude, they'll all be flush. Maybe it'll make more sense if we look at it in the picture here. You see, I want the 30, the -84, and the 008. I want them to be flush left, so I'm anchoring them to longitude. Now, there's a fundamental flaw in that concept, and that is I'm assuming English. In other languages, maybe longitude is not the longest word. So it might be a better idea to do a different kind of layout, like a grid layout here. That way, no matter what is the longest word, we can set 2 different columns, and that way the values are always to the right, and the values are all flush. But nonetheless, we'll go ahead and do it like so for now. So there's our latitude. Next thing I'm going to do is another text view. And this text view I'm going to call, we'll call it txt longitude. Okay, and this one's going to be a little interesting because we're going to anchor this to the left of longitude and anchor it below the latitude value that we just made. Now note the text still says text view. Let's go ahead and hit the ellipsis, and what we'll do, I'll tell you what we can do. This is one of those things that's a little easier to do in the back end. I'm going to go to text, and I'm going to take a look at our text view where we have Android text equals. This is the one we made for latitude. I want to take that 0.0 and I want to use that same value for longitude. So I'm simply going to do a little pasting here, like so. And now these 2 fields, if I go back to design view here, these 2 fields both have 0.0, and they're both referring to the same entry in our friend called strings.xml, this 0.0 entry. So I just went under the covers to this text tab. The truth is, as we're editing this design tab, the text tab behind the scenes is also getting updated. Let's confirm that. You notice right now it has about 60 lines in it. Now what happens if I grab a chronometer There we go. And what happens if I grab a chronometer, which is like a countdown clock, and what if I add this to our layout? So we again, you know what? No, we're going to discontinue that. We're going to do it like so. So once again, we make it flush. We make it to the right of longitude, and we make it below the value for latitude. You notice that we have this new chronometer, or this new countdown clock. Let's go to text and see how many lines we have. Aha! We used to have about 60. Now you see the chronometer's been added, and now we're up to about 69. So as we're editing the design view, behind the scenes, it's editing this text. If we feel more comfortable with XML, we can go play back in this XML, and we can edit things around here if we want. Okay, so far we have built the latitude, longitude, and GPS age. We still need to add a button, 3 text fields, 3 more buttons, and an image view. So still a bit to go. One thing I will point out, latitude and longitude are getting programmed, are changing programmatically. So in that case, we want to use a text view, not an edit text. A text view is read-only to the user. An edit text is editable to the user. So if something can be changed but not by the user, we don't want to give the user the impression that the user can change it. So if it's changed programmatically, let's use one of these text views and not an edit text. In other words, let's use a label. Okay, now buttons. I'm going to go back up to All and Button, and I'm just going to leave this at the default. I mentioned we will change the look and feel in a bit. Let's go ahead and constrain this to the top and also over to the right, and this will eventually be our pause button. So I'll put some text in just so I can remember that, come back to it later. Okay, the top of the screen is looking very good. The next thing that I want to do is an autocomplete text field. Text view. Now, autocomplete, what does that mean? That means as the user starts typing, it starts to complete based on what the user is typing. Remember, in Android, in any mobile platform, we want to keep user clicks and user typing to a minimum because it's a small keyboard, and also many times we're using our phones in times when we shouldn't use our phones. Times like when we're in a meeting. And admit it, when you're stopped at a red light. So these are times when you want to get as much done as you can with as little typing as you can. Now, when we're designing a layout, we want to minimize the widgets that are on that layout for the same reason I just said. We want a very simple view. We don't want to complicate the user's view. We want to give the user a quick way to get to action. So one of the things I did in the latest iterations of Plant Places Mobile is you'll notice that I have some autocomplete text views and also an edit text down here. And I've embedded the label inside of that widget. Before, the label was to the left of the widget, and you see it gave a kind of cluttered look and feel. It wasn't all flush, and frankly, it was 3 extra labels that I didn't need. By embedding the label inside of the widget, it saves me all of those labels, makes a much simpler look and feel. So how do we do it? The reason I call this out is you might think, oh, okay, I see text autocomplete text view. I'll just say plant name. Well, the problem is that's actually the value that is inside of this autocomplete text view. The user would have to click in there and then delete that before typing. Don't use that. So let's take plant name out. Okay, there's a better idea, but you have to find it. If we go down, there's something called hint. Hint is very similar to that text we were just editing, but the big thing with hint is it goes away as soon as the user puts a cursor in that field. So let's go ahead, let's go to our ellipsis, use the trick we did before, add new resource, new string value, plant name, like so. And now take a look, you see it's even a slightly different shade, and it says plant name. Now the trick is the width of this autocomplete is now based on that hint, which isn't right because we can end up with some fairly long plant names, and we want to take advantage of all the screen real estate that we can. So for plant width, for layout width, I'm going to change it from wrap content to match constraint, and now you see it takes up the entire width of the screen. Okay, just a few more to go. Let's take our autocomplete again, drop this down, and I'm going to go through this one a little bit faster because it's essentially a repeat of what we've already done. So anchor left and right, anchor below the next widget. Okay, remove the text, delete. Okay, layout width, we're going to go to match constraint. So go left to right, and then we're going to look for that thing called hint. There's our hint. Hit the ellipsis. This one, add new resource, new string value, location, location, and OK. So location's kind of like the name of a park, maybe. It could be the name of a park, name of a city, something like that. Okay, let's go with so autocomplete is listening for us typing, and it's going to give us that nice interactive kind of drop-down look and feel. In other words, here's a live look at the screen that we're currently making, and you see as I start typing Eastern, you see we can choose Eastern Redbud. Ooh, look at that, I like that animation. So I can choose Eastern Redbud, location, I can say Cincinnati, and it's going to narrow down to Cincinnati Zoo, for instance. And then description, I can type whatever I want. So see how these autocompletes work. Take a lot of text and accomplish it with a very minimal amount of typing. Right now we're going to work on this description field. So I'm going to, this is something the user can edit. So I go to text, I go to plain text, which is just a plain text field. I take and drop this, and now we do our constraints again. So put it right below the next, the last item that we added. Stretch left to right. Hopefully you're kind of getting the hang of this now. Layout width, match constraint, just like so. Text, we take away name. Okay, and then we scroll down to hint. You see we're getting a lot closer here. So we go to hint. I click the ellipsis, add new resource, new string value. And we'll call this one description. And resource value description. For the name, it has to not have spaces. For the value, you can put spaces if you wish. Okay, so we're all good there. Let's now add some buttons. Now we want the buttons to be kind of equally sized, and one interesting thing, and this is the live plant places that we're looking at right here. If I click on settings and I uncheck auto sync over Wi-Fi, I need to run back. I have to get a little bit tricky here because I have to refresh this screen. But you see there are 3 buttons now. I go back, and now there are 4 buttons. Because auto sync over Wi-Fi means the phone will automatically synchronize all of the data. If you turn that off, now there's an upload button that you manually have to press. So you see whether there are 3 buttons, whether there are 4 buttons, they're all equally weighted. The way we're going to do this is with a linear layout. So let's go ahead and grab the horizontal linear layout. I'll just drop it right here. Okay. And we'll, looks like it anchored pretty well, at least so far, but we'll go ahead and try and drop a couple points there. There we go. And now let's add some buttons to it. So I go to all, and we'll for ease of use, we'll just add 3 buttons here. So there we go, 1 and 2 and 3, and you see how they kind of stack next to each other. And then for the layout itself, I'm going to go back to the layout. You see how the entire layout is highlighted right here. And for the layout width, you see it's fixed at 368 dp. That's not what we want. For that, we want to do match constraint for the width, so take it all the way left to right. And for the height, we are going to change this to wrap content, which means, okay, shrink it up so it only contains those buttons. Okay, now we didn't actually put a constraint on, so I will go ahead and add those constraints like so. And you see that the buttons stretch to fill. As I mentioned, we will pretty up those buttons in a little bit, but more on that to come later. Okay, the last thing we need then is a place to put an image. So I'm going to look for image view. There we go. Grab the image view, just drop it right here. Okay, we have to put an image in, so I'll just pick a default little Android dude there. And now let's put that underneath our layout. And then we want the image to take up a variable amount of real estate, but as much real estate as possible. Because if you're looking at this application, if you're running it on a tablet, the text can essentially stay the same, but what you really want is a better look and feel for the images, because that's probably what you want to zoom into. So once again, let's change this from wrap to match and have it take up the entire screen that's left at the bottom. And now we have essentially our layout. At this point, I'm going to go ahead and save, and in just a moment, I'll commit and push to GitHub. One thing that I will say, constraint layout is really easy to take a kind of, we'll do it like so. Constraint layout makes it easy to take a complicated screen like the one that I have here and draw it out very quickly, as you see that we've done. The downside is, If you need to add something in the middle, if you need to modify the screen at some point in the future, maybe you want to add some third or fourth container between these two, I've found that to be very difficult in the GUI editor because you have to end up breaking the constraint. So you click on the red to say, okay, delete this connection, and then it gets really confused and it's not sure where to put everything. So if you have to modify a constraint layout, I usually end up dropping to this text view. One other thing that's subtle but important, if you have a component with a constraint on another component, so let's call that a dependency, the dependency component, the component that you're dependent on, has to be defined above you in this XML file. In other words, you see that this text view has a dependency on, this is text view 2, and you see that it is to the bottom of ID text view, which is the text view up here. Because there's a dependency from this text view to this text view has to come second, this text view has to come first. If I were to reverse these, it would get kind of confused and say, wait a minute, I don't understand, how do I have this kind of alignment? So just a couple subtle things that you want to keep in mind when you're working with a constraint view. But nonetheless, it does kind of make a nice fluid layout. So I hope this has been helpful. In the next video, we'll see how we can change these words to images. We definitely want images. Android says images are faster than words, which means we can recognize and internalize them quickly, where words we have to read. Big advantage number 2, if we're internationalizing, a word in English might be a lot shorter than a word in German. So if we use an image, that's universal. We can fit the image to the button and vice versa. If we use a word, we have to keep in mind, oh, how long could the word possibly be? That's another good reason for embedding our hints inside of our text boxes here, because if plant name in German is much longer, no problem. We have all kinds of real estate that we can deal with. On the other hand, if we did it old school style, if we put the label to the left of the text, well then the ratio of label to editable text field is going to vary based on the length of the number of letters in that label. So just a few considerations there. One other thing we want to do, and we'll do this in the next video, is change these IDs. So instead of button 2, button 3, button 4, we have meaningful names, so when we're programming against these buttons, we know what they are. I bring this up now just so we don't forget to do it. So I hope the video has been helpful. Look forward to seeing you again. Thank you.